Hi everyone, my name's Jared, and I'm here to discuss with you a complete misjustice and I believe illegal experimentation in Australian medicine. I'm using the outline of the Tuskegee report, which is the most famous illegal experimentation known so far, and I'm going to use the outline of that and proof that the laboratories are tampering with samples and our infectious diseases are deliberately refusing, and our medical staff, basically our entire medical system really, is deliberately denying recognition of symptoms so that they can not treat diseases properly. So let me just go through what I'm going to run through here quickly. Is with the understanding is the subjects were not told about their diagnosis. Participants were being denied proper treatments or given fake treatments and placebos instead. In some cases, when subjects were diagnosed with having syphilis by the physicians, researchers intervened and prevented treatment. Well, in this case, it's not researchers, it's Australian infectious diseases. They've all written that, oh no, withhold antibiotics, he doesn't have an infection, blah, blah, blah. Many of the subjects died painful deaths of syphilis during the study, which was stopped in 1973 by the US Department of Health, Education and Welfare, only after its existence was publicised and became a political embarrassment. Well, that's what I'm here for today. Today I'm going to try and show you the proof that you need to basically help me and our community stop being tortured and abused by Australian medicine. In regards to a bacteria, I believe is Streptococcus discolactae, but it's a form of Streptococcus either way. What I'm going to show you first is the proof that of what I've done to confirm that the laboratories are deliberately refusing to identify this bacteria. We're going to discuss the human biomes. There are areas of native flora, your skin, oral flora, nasal flora, bowel flora. Then you've got your two sterile zones, which are urethral flora and blood, which are supposed to be nil, zero. Sterile zones. I'm going to prove that. I'm going to show that the infectious diseases that I've seen have lied about the availability of testing that confirms this disease, and even after all this information was sent through the public safety group and made its way to Brad Hazzard, our Minister for Health and Ethical Medical Research, I was basically told to keep letting doctors partially treat me or treat my symptoms as they thought, instead of treating the disease and making sure that it goes away and identifying the threat to our community as a whole. First thing to know about Streptococcus discolactae, it's an orally contagious bacterium, contagious person to person, animal to person and surface to person. So basically anyone who collects this in an area can cause an outbreak. There are many ways for this to be transferred, and it can come from animals, which is going to be represented in a case study by Virginia Boone in relation to liver, kidney and heart disease, which is linked to this bacteria. And there's also a lot of other information that's going to come through, but the first thing we're going to focus on right now, we're going to get underway. It's going to take a while. Unfortunately, medical stuff is complicated, and it takes a lot to come around and recognise the symptoms, as well as I had to learn how to build my own culture plates, because Australia doesn't allow you to buy anything that's useful outside salt agars, which will really only grow fungus and that sort of things. It doesn't really grow bacteria. Any of your TSAs or your blood agars, with that, they don't allow. I'm assuming so that you don't find out that they're screwing you over. So in another video I'll show you how to make these and how to build your own incubator at home so that you can test the laboratories yourself. And for now we'll show you what I've done, and we'll get onto the links of what they're deliberately trying to achieve here. And you're probably wondering, why would they do this? A simple fact is the amount of money in emergency medicine, from things like necrosis, sepsis, osteomyelitis, emergency medicines they get a huge fund, plus they get the long-term stays and things in hospital, which is a massive financial boost. Then you've got the immunodisorders that they're claiming that are actually listed as symptoms of this disease, and we'll go through a list of those as well. And then you also got the research funding that they're going to claim for all of these immunodisorders that are actually symptoms of non-treated disease. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through how I prove that the laboratories are deliberately tampering with samples by using my urinary tract, which is the only sterile zone that I have access to. Obviously I can't go and get blood out of myself wherever I want. I'm going to prove that this growth that should be sterile in my urinary tract keeps coming back as a nil from the laboratories. Infectious diseases, Indi Sundararaja at Westmead Infectious Diseases said that he did 7-day cultures, because I believed at that stage that it might just be that they're not growing fast enough, but in actual fact it's that they're being deliberately denied recognition. So what I did here was, the first thing I did was I took a sputum sample that was ordered by my doctor for this purulent, as they call it, sputum, and I added two colonies from this culture here. Now, by adding those two cultures, I had fully grown gram-positive cokies and fresh gram-positive cokies, and the result was multiple gram-positive cokies. So, therefore confirming that what I was actually growing was a gram-positive cokie. The next thing I did was I put that to the test to a microbiology study group on Facebook, and they identified Candidus albicans and Enterococcus just off a photograph. But later, after it was recognised as a gram-positive cokie, Streptococcus was also identified. Now, after that, I looked into, well, how can you tell the difference between Staphylococcus and Streptococcus? And it's pretty, I didn't realise quite how easy that was. There's only two gram-positive cokies, and that's Staph, which is a large separated colony, and Streptococcus, which is a large group of colonies, of smaller colonies grouped together. So therefore we've confirmed that it's a Streptococcus. The second test I did, to test the laboratories in this case, was I took this growth here, put this entire plate into a urinary sample, in the hopes of, if there's enough bacteria, they'll be forced to identify it. Now, the results I got back for that, zero growth in bacterium, just candidas. So they recognise the candidas but not the bacteria. Now, the third test I did for this was I took a direct urethral swab, which is growing this gram-positive cokie here, identified as a Streptococcus because it's small clustered colonies. And through private testing, which took me a long time to find because it's not well known, I requested it as a penile sample. Now, as a penile sample, it becomes a skin sample, therefore being available for native flora. All of a sudden, when you put it in a native flora area, there's moderate gram-positive cochies again. Now that proves that anything that comes from a sterile site, they claim nil growth, but if you put it in a native flora area, I've got a gram-positive cochi. Now, this gram-positive cochi identified as a streptococcus, and later on we'll go through the tests that confirm that it's Streptococcus discolactate and how I got to that conclusion through research and through case study. But another thing that became apparent to me as I was doing this was my latest doctor gave me a request for that sputum sample that we discussed earlier. Now on this form I've got written on it Streptococcus discolactate, Enterococcus and Peptostreptococcus. Now these three Streptococcus are related to a streptolysin O test, which I will get to in a little while as well as part of the testing, and we'll go through that with the research. But I was told I can't do that again because tampering with a form is medical fraud, regardless of whether it's to try and save my own life. So when I got private testing done, I got it listed as Streptococcus discolactate. You'll notice with this, when they gave me this result, which is the same result that confirmed the gram-positive cochi from a penile sample, that it's Streptococcus group B agalactate for nil growth, or not isolated. That means that they changed the name of the bacteria to prevent identification of the bacteria that was requested. And the reason for that bacteria being requested will be a part of the next section. I'm just going to go through, I'm just going to come and tidy this up, and I'll be back in a moment. But before I do, I want everyone to understand that this is a systemic bacterium. This is a systemic infection. So that bacteria from my urethral swab, if I had that I listed as a penile swab, it was moderate gram-positive cochies. If I had have put it in as a general sample, it should have come back as heavy gram-positive cochies, which again, anything that is +++ or heavy has a chance of being a pathogen, therefore should be identified, which they're not. Doesn't matter where that sample came from or what it is. Heavy growth is not normal, and we'll move on to further things with that later. Now in my next video I'm going to actually show everyone how to make these, what you'll need to make your own incubator at home so that you can test the laboratories yourself when you've got any of the diseases that I'm going to discuss with you in relation to this bacteria. And I'm also going to, we'll also have a bit of a discussion of some of the other bacteriums that are contagious just as easily, that I've noticed, that I've found in my local area, are not being identified until people are in critical health, or they're just being treated as an immuno disorder, being given a whole bunch of immunosuppressants, painkillers, steroids, anti-inflammatories, you name it. They're carrying a box full of stuff because they don't want to treat the underlying infection. And we'll get onto that subject a little bit later on too. So just give me a minute, I'll go back this up, and we'll come back and we'll move on to some of the research and the case studies that I've used to identify this Streptococcus as Streptococcus discolactate, and we'll talk soon.